And I have to say this on a personal note. I learned about leadership differently than I think a lot of my colleagues. And in Indian country, Uncle Billy used to say that, you lead to leave, and you're bringing up this next set of leaders.
Well, that's former Seattle City Council President Deborah Juarez talking to me at the end of 2023, at the end of her second term on Seattle Channel. She was talking about leading to lead, quoting one of her heroes, the Native American leader and activist Billy Frank Jr. But now it appears Juarez is coming back. She's thrown her hat into the ring to fill the D5 position that she left. How will that affect the council, and how will a new court ruling impact the council's plans to build a controversial makerspace in the SODO neighborhood? Plus, clothing might have to go back on, which means the gloves are off in a fight over a nude beach in Denny Blaine Park. So welcome once again to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. I am with my friend and co-host, David Croman of the Seattle Times, City Hall reporter there. David, I got to jump on this one with you early on baseball here. Cal Raleigh winning the Major League Baseball Home Run Derby. Where does that rank in Seattle's top sports moments? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it'll be up there. I was thinking about Cal Raleigh, and he hasn't actually been with the Mariners that long, but
right.
I think even still, he's already cemented himself as a top Mariner. I think he could quit baseball at the end of the season, and he would hold that title. And winning. We still talk about and see highlights from Ken Griffey Jr.'s victorious home run derbies, and adding Cal Raleigh to that is incredible.
That's
Although it's very
sweet.
Mariners fandom of me to feel really uneasy about how good things have felt for Mariners, being a Mariners fan over the last few days.
A little too good. Yeah.
Just expecting a crash here anytime.
No, I think that's par for the course. We'll see what happens in the second half. Well, David, thank you for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks especially to the patrons of the show. You can become one of those cool kids for as low as $5 a month. You can always give more, too. You'll get access to our patrons' first content. You'll even get your own decal. Looks like that. Pretty snazzy. I've sent out a few of these over the past couple weeks here. Make sure you check out Seattle News, Views, and Brews and support the show on Patreon. Also, find this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. Our top story again this week, finding a replacement for departing District 5 council member Kathy Moore. Last week, at the time I posted this podcast, only 7 people had signed up for the job, but over the next 24 hours, 15 more people got their application in, and one of them was former council president Deborah Juarez. I actually texted her when I saw the news, David, and I wrote, "I thought you were done with this gig." She wrote back, LOL, then 2 smiley faces, an avatar raising her hand, and the 100% emoji. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but suffice it to say that she is back here. I guess, David, for me, seeing her name on this list of now 22 applicants was a little surprising. And also, it feels like easily she's the lead candidate here, right?
Yes, to both of those things. I was very surprised. I think I did a double exclamation point to the person who first sent me the list. Because Deborah Juarez, saying she hated the job would probably be going too far, but she was never shy about her frustrations with the job. I did an interview with her in her first year in office where she kind of complained about some of the aspects of the job and how much easier it is in the private sector and things like that. And then, on a loftier level, to your point about a lot of her language around leading to leave. And it was always very, she spoke a lot about passing the torch to the next generation and things like that. And so of the former council people that I have covered, she's high up there in people I'm surprised to see wanting to come back to City Hall.
Yeah.
And then, yes, to your point about her being the favorite, I think I would be shocked if she's not selected to this position.
Yeah.
From what we've heard, she already has majority support. This is a council that I'm sure is not going to get cute with their pick. They have a lot to do, and there's a big learning curve to taking this job. And Deborah Juarez, however you feel about her politics, has been through this. She was on the council for 2 terms. She knows the job. She knows the position. She has run pretty much every aspect of it. So if they're looking for somebody who can come in and tackle the budget, I think that's going to be the top thing that, she can do that. And so, I'd be shocked if they chose somebody other than Deborah Juarez.
Yeah, there's a forum at North Seattle Community College on the 21st of this month. If you want to check that out, Seattle Channel will have that available to you, or you can go up and check it out in person. I guess looking at the budget, of course, that's a big issue there, but where else do you see her vote potentially looming the largest when it comes to some of the bigger decisions ahead for the city council? Anything sticking out for you?
Yeah, on the growth, the comprehensive plan stuff, Kathy Moore was carving out a space as somebody who was really pushing back on some of the proposals in Mayor Harrell's comprehensive growth plan, particularly the neighborhood center piece, and was calling out specific neighborhood centers within her district. And, Kathy Moore was, I think, known for being quite responsive to public feedback from within her district. You can kind of quibble with how representative that feedback was of the people who live there, but she was pretty responsive if she would hear kind of a groundswell of opposition or support or whatever it might be. And I think that is similar to Deborah Juarez. I mean, her reputation was being probably the most district-focused person in a new district system.
Yes.
Because remember, when she was elected, that was the first time that
when it started. Yeah.
And it was a big part of her identity there. And so, Deborah Juarez voted for all of the up zones of her time there. So it's not like she's anti-density or anything like that, but she is responsive to neighborhood concerns, and there have been a lot of those around these neighborhood centers. And so, the question really for me is, does she kind of continue the themes that Kathy Moore was hammering on when she was in office, or does she take a new direction and more fully endorse Mayor Harrell's plans?
We're going to see. That's going to be a big one. Another one is going to be the Seattle Shield legislation, which I want to talk about with you now. Just quickly, keeping on top of what the council's up to this week, folks. Transportation Committee's talking about its pothole filling plans. SDOT didn't fill as many potholes last year. The council wants to know why, but there is a lot of investment going into potholes, so they're going to be talking about that. There's also an update on the district project fund, where Seattle's different districts get money for transportation priorities. The full council is approving measures for nuisance properties, civil penalties for graffiti, and speeding up the sound transit permit process for light rail, which we have discussed on the podcast over the past few weeks. But this one to watch, I really think, is in the Budget Committee, a special meeting on Wednesday of this week to discuss this Seattle Shield measure sponsored by Councilmember Rink. That would mean some major changes to the city's business and operation tax system, B&O taxes, if it's approved by voters. Seattle Shield would add $90 million to the city budget, and 90% of Seattle businesses paying B&O tax would either no longer pay tax or see tax reductions. Higher revenue companies would pay some more. Just a quick recap on this. A lot of pushback here from bigger businesses to the Downtown Seattle Association, which has said the council is rushing this, and this is bad fiscal policy as downtown tries to mount an economic comeback. David, I want to put aside the bad fiscal policy critique for a minute, but the point that this is rushed, I think there's some truth to that, because this is a major change to the way Seattle taxes its businesses. And if the council wants to get this on the ballot for November, it has to meet an August 5th deadline. Help me out here. What are your thoughts on the speed of what the council is considering right now?
The argument that the mayor and Alexis Mercedes Rink are making is that, it's not rushed because it's a ballot measure that we're putting it before voters. They can have plenty of time to consider it over the next few months. But it is a politically tricky question, and it doesn't leave the council a lot of time to grapple with it, because I think on its face, a lot of this council would oppose this measure. A majority of the council opposed the new tax to fund the social housing measure, putting the alternative on there. And so, I think the tight timeline does make it difficult for them, because, their choices here are, they can put it on the ballot. I suppose they could come up with an alternative too, but that's a thing that would take kind of a long time to craft. So it does limit their ability to do that. I think that Councilmember Rink and Mayor Harrell have made the political calculation that for whatever pushback is going to come from the business community, Seattle voters have basically shown that they support this kind of thing, and it's
capital gains tax, the whole thing,
beneficial to them politically. And I think particularly for Council President Nelson, it puts her in a tricky situation, because she hasn't come out one way or the other against it, but has expressed some, I would say, skepticism about this. But she's also going to be in a pretty tight re-election race, and so she really has to make a political calculation here. Like, my hunch is that she would like to vote against this, but it is, like I said, kind of politically tricky for her to go on the record as opposing something like this. So there's a lot of considerations to make in not very much time.
Very true. And Councilmember Rink put out a letter recently asking her colleagues at the city and state level, for that matter, to condemn federal funding cuts from the Trump administration and support Seattle Shield, and additionally criticize the state legislature for not doing enough to generate progressive revenue. 5 members of the city council signed on here: Rink, Strauss, Hollingsworth, Solomon, and Saka. So that would indicate potentially we've got the support for Seattle Shield within the council, even as it stands, even before Councilmember Juarez, if she does comes back on. You've got Council President Nelson, Council Members Rivera and Kettle that did not sign on here. I just wanted to get your take on what you made of this letter signing business, because I think it was at least a little bit of virtue signaling here, just trying to figure out what it means that 3 council members did not sign on to it.
I think it was a good bit of politics from Mercedes Rink.
Cleverly done, yeah.
Cleverly done. It's got a good top line headline. I oppose President Trump's cuts, and who in City Hall would be opposed to that? But it does also include some commitments to things that I think the rest of the council is uncomfortable with, and particularly condemning like state cuts. That's a pretty big leap for, I think, some of the council members to make, to criticize the Democrats and Governor Bob Ferguson in the legislature. I think a few of them, might say that the state went too far in raising taxes. I think it's a good point, though, that, like, for example, Councilmember Saka was at the press conference announcing the business and occupation tax change. He would be somebody that you might have some questions about which way he's leaning. So the fact that he was there, Councilmember Solomon signing off on this, if I had to guess, it will make it to the ballot. And also because even the council members who have some kind of queasiness about the proposal itself have a little bit of separation, because it's not like they're voting to enact it. They're just voting to put it on the ballot.
That's right.
Certainly the chamber would prefer it never got to that point. But from a political standpoint, it's hard to deny that it is expertly done by Councilmember Rink to put a lot of pressure on her colleagues to come out in favor of something right before an election that, I think polling in recent history has shown voters like this kind of proposal. And so it puts them in a difficult spot if they're on the fence.
No, we're going to see what happens here over the next couple of weeks. There's a committee meeting this week about this. There may be some more committee meetings about it, but really the race is on. If they don't have this done by August 5th, then it can't make it on the November ballot, and really gives an indication about how important this extra $90 million is to them. I know they're going to be lobbying for it. At least some members of the council will be, to make sure they have that revenue come budget time here. All right, well, coming up, a major piece of legislation from the city council is now in limbo after a court ruling here. David's got the scoop on what's next with the plan for a maker's space district around T-Mobile Field. We're going to break it down next on Now Hear This. Remember when there was a big battle back in February and March at City Hall? Council President Sarah Nelson pushed through a plan to create a maker's district complete with 990 units of housing down in SODO. It was a very contentious 6-3 vote, and there was a lot of concern that the council was running afoul of the Port of Seattle, which says the new district will clog up the workings of the port. The port actually made a deal with the city in 2023 to prevent housing from coming into this area just south of the stadiums, and filed suit against the city after this law was passed. One of the big claims in the suit is that Nelson created this rezone to benefit one person, Chris Hansen, the landowner, who you will remember tried to build a basketball arena in the spot a few years ago. This point was summarized by more than a few angry dock workers in public comments.
Ladies and gentlemen, we live in dark times of cynicism and greed. And no, I'm not talking about D.C. We had a deal. But a billionaire and at least one duplicitous council member would rather screw over the entire region.
Charlie Bendock, the longshoreman there, speaking back in February. Here we are in July, and this new ordinance the council was putting in place here was supposed to go into effect in June. But David, that's now been put on hold, as you reported, by a King County Superior Court judge. Now the port is going to hold a deposition here. What's going on?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is a land use appeal, and at the risk of getting too far in the weeds, the debate is basically over whether or not this bill is a land use decision, which is, are you doing this to make way for a specific project, to benefit a specific person? And the court is arguing that, yes, it is. Like, no matter what the city says or whatever technically is in the record, this is going to benefit Chris Hansen, is going to make his properties that he has near SODO viable. And in fact, they have come up with very specific numbers. They're talking about 990 units. They're even talking about details about for whom they would be affordable and things like that. So no matter what the city says, the Port of Seattle is saying this is a land use decision. The city is saying, no, it's not. This is just regular legislation. There is no permit for a project. There's no land use decision to make yet. We'll probably get there, in which case we can have that fight, but we're not there yet. The reason that's important is because if it's a land use decision, there's a lot more process that needs to go in. It sort of becomes more quasi-judicial and just much more highly regulated. And that's intended to prevent kind of backroom deals for friends, basically. It's an interesting argument to make. And the judge so far has leaned in the direction of agreeing with the port. There hasn't been kind of a final ruling on when or if this legislation can go into effect. But for right now, it's on hold until we get a little more clarity, because this judge seems to be at least for now, basically agreeing with the port that this is a de facto land use decision. The deposition part is interesting because she also signed off on discovery as part of this, because this is a trial. Basically, it has a date for when this will go to trial. And so she signed off on discovery, which is interesting because it gives the port a lot of access to communications, which you or I could get through a public records request, but this includes communications with the unions and things like that might not be as readily available for public disclosure. And then it authorizes the port to call both Chris Hansen and Sarah Nelson for depositions, which is not very often that we get public officials in City Hall being called for depositions. Yep. And what they're going to be asking basically is, did you guys coordinate on this? Did you have a plan in place to pave the way for your projects, Chris Hansen? And if the answer is yes, then probably the judge is going to find that this ordinance was illegal.
Is there an indication of that there was some of these talks between Sarah Nelson and Chris Hansen?
There is indication, but I don't want to overstate it than that. There, in some of the declarations from the port is saying, in some of the conversations they had, Sarah Nelson kind of alluded to having a deal in place. At one of the declarations even said that she referred to Chris Hansen as her client, which would be interesting. Those are not written in stone. The lawyers for the city argued, you may have misheard. She might have meant constituent. There's some squishiness to that. The port is saying that, yes, there is some evidence that's happened. Sarah Nelson, before the vote, said she never talked directly to Chris Hansen. That might be true. Also, though, Chris Hansen has a lot of associates that it's possible she spoke with, even if she never spoke directly to Chris Hansen. So we don't know one way or the other at this point. The port seems to think yes. The city, leading up to the vote, was saying no.
Got it. That's going to be such an interesting thing to see, potentially an active city council member getting deposed here. I guess looking at that for Nelson, how much of a concern is this for her as she heads into the primary in August and most likely the election in November? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if this has political salience. It's kind of a weird enough issue in that there's a lot of sort of progressive types who are not usually Sarah Nelson fans who actually like that housing would be allowed here. So this was not a big fight that people outside of the industrial and maritime industry were kind of looking to pick. I don't know how many people vote specifically on the industrial maritime voting lines necessarily, but that is an area where she had some support, I think, in her past election, and they're going to, we'll see what happens with the port. If this legislation is allowed to stand, I think they care enough about it that, say, if Sarah Nelson loses in her election, they would feel more confident kind of coming back and trying to rerun this and push for a repeal of this bill. And so, I think certainly this whole process makes it so that the port would not shed any tears if Sarah Nelson lost, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. I don't know that will actually translate into her losing real votes.
Yeah, it was very fraught, as you recall, back in February and March. And certainly, there's definitely some inside baseball going on here. But interesting to see how this is affecting the relationship between the port and the city of Seattle, and interesting to see what happens next for Sarah Nelson with this. But thank you for tracking that down. Again, a court case that is still in progress here, and I know David and I will be tracking details on that one. I did want to talk about another court matter you're tracking. This is about public nudity at Denny Blaine Park in the Madrona neighborhood there in Seattle. A lot of fighting over this. People have been nude in this park for a long time, predominantly from the LGBTQ community, but neighbors are saying now we're seeing a lot of public masturbation and sex. They filed suit against the city. A judge has said, hey, City of Seattle, you need to submit a plan on how you will eliminate these public sex acts, as well as, this is the quizzical quote from the court documents here, nudity as constituted. I should point out public nudity is not a crime in our state unless it is an affront to people here. David, can you explain what's going on here? Is the judge saying this nude beach will be a nude beach no more, or what are you getting out of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's a little squishy, and I think we'll know more in a couple weeks when the city has to come back and present a plan to the judge.
Yeah.
But basically the neighbors here were saying this park has crossed into the realm of public nuisance. The city isn't doing enough to crack down on that. Therefore, judge, you should order this park to close. The city is saying, look, we support this beach as a nude beach. Nudity is not illegal. As for the rest of the activity, of course, we don't support it. We've done what we can to crack down on it, but we're not endorsing that. So therefore, you can't hold us liable for it, and you shouldn't shut down the park. The judge kind of went down the middle here. He didn't close he basically agreed with the neighbor's case, but he didn't close the park. Instead, ordering the city to come up with a plan in 2 weeks to solve these problems. And he gave that order, but it was left unclear what he meant, what he was kind of including in that umbrella. So the city's lawyer at the end asked, Judge, are you talking about nudity here? And kind of thought about it for a second and said, yeah, I am. Nudity is constituted. And so, that leaves open the question of what does nudity as constituted mean? Does that mean that there is some different kind of nudity that will be allowed there?
Yeah.
Like you said, nudity itself is not illegal, and the city has gone on record supporting this park as a nude beach. They said it is in the public interest of the city to keep this as a nude beach.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what's happening here is you kind of are trying to split two issues, which is kind of typical nudity and inappropriate nudity, and where the line is between those two things, and where the line is between, the state law says nudity is allowed except for when it causes affront or alarm. So when is something
sure
causing
sounds like
affront
that's
or alarm?
happening here.
But does that, because some people are causing affront or alarm, does that mean you close it down for everybody? There's just a lot of kind of squishiness here. As for the broader picture, it's, and why people or care so much about this one beach. It's kind of interesting because I feel like it has become this microcosm for Seattle politics, which is you've got kind of rich people lobbying for cleaning up public disorder, and then you've got the LGBTQ community advocating for safe space, and it's this stew of how do you prioritize police resources and who gets influence in City Hall,
right?
The gentrification of the city, and it's just there's a lot kind of wrapped up in this one little park, and so as a result, it's become kind of a political hot button topic.
Big time. And just to wrap up on this, you mentioned in your piece a trial is scheduled for April of next year if the case isn't settled by then. Do you see this going to the courtroom? And if not, this is the big question I have: what would some sort of settlement look like? Do you have any ideas on that? Thoughts?
No, I don't see it going to trial. I mean, mostly because almost nothing ever goes to trial, and this feels like a very settleable case. My expectation would be they come up with some kind of enforcement plan. I don't know what it is. Maybe the city agrees to pay for more security there or something. Yeah. I will say that the two sides have tried to kind of come up with a solution, and so far failed. But maybe being under the watch of a judge will kind of spur that, because I don't know that anyone actually wants this to go to trial.
Yeah, nudity on trial. I don't even want to begin to think about how the protests outside that would be in the city of Seattle. Watch out. All right, well, we'll see what happens there, David. Thank you for tracking that one down. In a couple of weeks, we should hear this plan from the city, so hopefully some more details then. But coming up, the Seattle Police Department's new video surveillance system, well, they're online this week, but not everybody's so excited about how they might reduce crime. Look at the Real-Time Crime Center, what's happening with video surveillance there, here on What's Next. David, your colleague Mike Carter wrote about the city's new Real-Time Crime Center camera surveillance system getting up and running this week along Aurora Avenue North and downtown Chinatown ID2. He wrote about the chilling effect the Trump administration has had when it comes to expanding technology like this, a concern echoed by the American Civil Liberties Union that video information of this nature could be used by Trump's ICE teams to round up people and deport them. City officials are saying that's not going to happen, but the ACLU says the concern is real, just a serious potential for abuse. I thought it was interesting that Mike brought this up again. I just wanted to get your general thoughts about this expanded surveillance program. What's happening with it right now?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this is the ultimate in start and stops. Seems like we've been kind of having this debate since I started covering City Hall. I have some recollection of touring a prototype of a real-time crime center in like 2016 in the Seattle Police Department. It's just there's been a lot of hand-wringing about the scope of surveillance capabilities for the Seattle Police Department. We have this ordinance that makes it so they have to go through a lot of process before they introduce any new technologies.
Right.
And it feels like it's very much it caught in the pendulum swing of Seattle politics, which is that, when it swings towards people being more concerned about public safety, we see kind of an uptick in support for this stuff. When it swings back toward kind of greater concern for civil liberties and civil rights, there becomes more kind of pushback. I would say we're in the former right now. I think there was not the level of pushback against this kind of surveillance work there used to be. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think public safety remains a pretty big concern for a lot of voters, and so they're willing to make that trade-off. They feel basically okay with Seattle having these surveillance technologies. The Seattle Police Department being understaffed, as we've talked about a bunch of times. Yep. Technology is often a substitute for staffing, or pitched that way. And then, the mayor's office is making the argument that, look, this this technology also cuts down on face-to-face interactions between individuals and police. So if you're worried about where those sort of interactions lead, this is good. Means that there's going to be less of them.
Yeah.
Of course, like you said, the fact that we have a Trump administration that is pretty aggressively going after cities like Seattle, and we're collecting a bunch of data on individuals, I think that is giving folks like the ACLU and some activists a lot of concern.
Yeah, and this whole line of thinking, we're all on camera anyway, everywhere. I've heard that from a few different public officials, including our new chief, Sean Barnes. So, what's adding 48 more with a plan for 17 more on top of that when the system is fully ready? I think that's the part where I hear what you're saying. The pendulum is kind of swinging that way to have more of this surveillance going. But I guess the other piece of this too, which I know we've discussed earlier, but is this something that's going to help the SPD prevent crime? It sounds like property crime, it's had some potential changes there in the places where this type of technology has been used, but the violent crime, not so much. That's the part where I think there's still some question marks.
Yeah, that's right. I think for a lot of people, property crime is the crime that they interact with the most, though. I think that's where when people complain about crime, a lot of them, their personal experience has to do with property crime, which isn't to say other sorts of crime isn't horrible, but we hear this a lot when, my colleague Danny Westnake has been writing a lot of columns about, crime dropping in Seattle and the political narratives around that. And the response we get to that often is, well, property crime is going vastly underreported. And it's hard to say whether or not that's true, but I do think it is property crime plays a sort of big role in shaping the narratives of public safety in Seattle. And so even if this is kind of primarily focused on property crime, I think that for a lot of people will go a long way into justifying it.
Fair. All right. Well, David, time to wrap up with you. I wanted to come back on something, just how lucky I feel this season to be a Mariners fan. I don't know if you saw this on Instagram, the Heck Yes Cal promotion. Like, it's a T-shirt giveaway, right? Yeah, it's great. To support the latest scratch game from the Washington Lottery. I don't play, but I do look on Instagram every now and then. And there's that ad where, like, the couple wants to go on a cruise, but Cal convinces them to go to spring training instead. Anyway, apparently only 20 of these shirts were made. It looked like there were close to 800 people who entered this contest online. But, dude, I won. The Washington Lottery.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. They just told me
congratulations.
I know. They're sending me a shirt in the next 2 weeks. So, again, even if Cal Raleigh doesn't have a great rest of the season, I feel like so far ahead right now. It's kind of awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that? I know. Have to do some quick math, but low.
Two out of, what do we got? So, yeah, like maybe a 1 in 4.
1 in 40.
Yeah, 1 in 40 chance, which is, I guess that's about, I got the way it works. But, hey, man.
That's good. Yeah, good job. You're going to get a lot of comments on that when you wear that to your next game.
Heck yeah. Yeah, and also being a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley, and they did the blue and gold here. It's kind of like a double up deal for me. I'm feeling pretty jazzed about it. Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, the company of greatness. That's we'll do like a shirt swap every now and then. See if we can share it out there. Well, thank you, David. Thanks to everybody listening. Also to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you're not a patron, make that happen. Please consider a pledge of $5 or more per month on Patreon to be a patron. It's a great deal. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you download. We are there. Share that stream. Make sure you let people know what's going on. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.